thoughts into consideration. So that's all. Thank you.
Sure.
Elizabeth, then Kristen, and then Alicia.
Hi, Michelle. I agree. Thank you for hosting. It's great to have this opportunity. And yes, District 3 covers lots of areas. I think the main concerns in the North Atlanta cluster areas of District 3 kind of fall under two categories. One is for the board to continue to push for community engagement and particularly student engagement. And it's particularly come up with this potential change in the community service hours.
Right.
So I've been really encouraged just by seeing what board members have repeatedly asked of the superintendent staff, the people suggesting these changes. And I really hope y'all continue to demand community engagement and particularly student engagement of high school students. It's ridiculous, the lack of engagement of high school students who are so easy to find on devices and like taking, surveys, etc. Let's engage. It should not be that hard. The other area of concern is what seems to be a kind of revert back to less principal autonomy. We fought hard. You were very active in getting the charter operating systems put in place as a choice. And part of that is seeking creative solutions and waivers by Go Teams. I've seen kind of none of that. And I'm not sure if that's just a pandemic reality this past year, but we really seem to have shifted away from looking at each school's individual needs and using creative solutions and waivers. And how can we are not a one size fits all school district, never have been, never will been. It doesn't benefit children. And how can we continue to make the superintendent's office truly push for creative solutions that are independent schools and recognize principal autonomy? I think we've seen it most restrictive in the middle school area, particularly with this enrichment block that was not really, the principal wasn't given much choice of how to run the enrichment versus remediation block. And it was really, parents were very disappointed. It was a lack of service to children. So how can we encourage and see the district doing more around that to really uphold our agreement with the state under the charter operating systems?
Okay, I'm taking notes, just so you know.
Thank you for engaging.
Yeah, absolutely. I will tell you, my daughter, she was in middle school this past year. She was in 8th grade. And it was interesting that you talk about the enrichment versus the remediation, because she saw it as a study hall, which my second son, who was a junior this past year, they also had a study hall embedded in the Midtown, which was very different than other.
Maybe it was a Sutton issue then, but it was not delivered. Yeah. It was a play on your phone. Let's cut time off your classes to play on your phone with no supervision is what it was. Yeah. And the concern is if that's a 3-year commitment, is that Sutton's going into a new principal. Will that principal have the power to decide what's best for the school and for the students, basically? That's the question. Yeah. I was impressed that the district gave more autonomy on that issue to high school principals, but in my understanding, they didn't, at least initially, to middle school principals.
Yeah, no, I think that's really good feedback, because that is something new that we've done. And it was intentional around, trying to bring kids back up from COVID. And that's great. And I hear you on, and it's interesting because when Dr. Herring first came on board, that was something that I kind of told her. I was like, we have some schools that should be allowed to have a lot of autonomy, and we have other schools that I believe have had too much autonomy and haven't shown us that they're able to create gains. So I've got it. It's really good feedback. And I just want to give a shout out to Keith, who has helped facilitating this. He's with the board office. He does lead the student advisory committee that we have, and the kids are great about giving him feedback that he gives to the board, and that's why we did all the breakfasts with the board to all the high schools. So he's great. So I know he's taking notes about, okay, I need an app where I can do a survey, because he's totally on top of it and has really done a great job.
I would love if y'all could record some of those or somehow send out the student state. Would be great to get a feel of student concerns across the district.
Yes, and what was interesting is so many of the student concerns across the district were very similar. So yeah, despite our varying communities, the students all pretty much had one voice, which was interesting to hear.
Great. Thank you so
Oh,
much.
Thanks for
Keith.
joining.
Keith, I believe that report is available, right? I mean, can you make that
Yes.
report?
Yes, the report is available. It's on Board Docs. I was just getting ready to say it's on Board Docs now.
No,
So all of
I'm
their
sorry.
meetings are published there. So if you want to, you can all go back from the top of last year and look at all to the end. So.
Assembly is not board
Assembly,
docs.
yes.
I'm sorry. I don't know why I'm saying Board Docs. Simply, I'm sorry.
No worries. No worries.
All right, so we have Kristen,
Kristen,
and then
right.
after Kristen, we go into Alicia, then Laura.
Perfect. Thank you. This is Kristen. Thank you so much for letting us engage like this. I have first a quick comment in terms of feedback and then a question. So in terms of feedback, I think as I've kind of observed a lot of these meetings, my son is a rising third grader at Spark and will stay at Spark in that new proposal. And I think the process has been making me nervous as someone in the business community who consults Fortune 500 companies on strategy. I get nervous when there's so many questions about the data. In terms of engagement, we're not really seeing our feedback in the proposal. And so I think with Spark students having an outsized impact, whether it's the 2/3 of Spark kids that leave or the 1/3 of kids that stay, I think I want to understand a little bit more about kind of the implications for Spark kids. So for example, my question is, say the majority of Spark kids who are impacted choose the grandfathering. That's a large volume of kids. Can you talk a little bit about the implications that you have discussed as a group in terms of kind of what that might mean in terms of building capacity, teachers, traffic, et cetera? I think that would be helpful to understand.
Yes. So just to be really clear, the administration does this work and they bring forth their thoughts to the board. So it's not as though I'm in on a meeting that's talking about what the process for grandfathering is. However, I have made it very clear to Dr. Herring that they have to start from now to understand who is going to keep their child where and for how long, and if the sibling is going to move with the child as well, right? Because we've talked about, if a rising third grader, for example, your case, has a kindergartner, are the two children going to stay in the same school? Are they going to stay at Spark, even though they may be zoned to Inman? And then how are you going to map that out? Because really, it creates a very complex matrix of enrollment, in my opinion, and then trying to figure out how you're going to allocate funds to help smooth the transition. And I believe the idea of grandfathering in and allowing a deeper reach with respect to grade levels that are grandfathered in is to help the community transition into what are really, it's really 4 new elementary schools, because everyone's getting a little bit is getting shuffled. I will say Virginia Highlands definitely getting the most shuffled, but this is where the administration wants to go. So I think there's still a lot of work that needs to be done there. We do have a year to well, not quite a year, but we still have a runway of 6 to 9 months before you need to register again for March to see which schools you're going to go to. But I think hopefully the administration is doing the right work to make sure that they're getting the right data so that they understand which children want to stay where and for how long, so that they can allocate the funds appropriately and staff the schools appropriately.
And will they have any of those, any kind of ballpark estimates before they make a decision?
That's a great question. I doubt it. I'm just telling you that I doubt it because I haven't seen anything that's saying that they want to know who wants to stay where before. So I think what initially, just from a process standpoint, I think what initially has to happen is the proposal has to be approved by the board before we move forward. Once it's approved, that kind of tells the administration, yes, move forward, engage the community on how you want to roll out this plan. Does that make sense?
Yeah, no, that makes sense. And I do think if it is possible to get a projection, I think that would give us kind of more confidence that you are informed and have data to inform your vote.
I got you. Yeah, I got you. How to grandfather kids and with,
And if I may, Michelle, really quickly, I know I don't want to hog your meeting, but those were good points. And I'm glad you brought up that the administration is doing this, because I think there is a perception that the board is sitting out as a group discussing this, and we're not. When we discuss this, it's in public as a board. But the other thing about your question is about, were we thinking about, the ramifications of a large portion of people make that decision to opt into grandfathering. That feedback has definitely gotten back to the administration. I just wanted you to know that, because I heard, that, talk of that. So they're aware. So just bear in mind that they're hearing it. Yeah, all the things that you're bringing up, they are hearing.
Perfect, thank you.
We're forwarding that on.
And Tamara, just to be clear, I mean, I'm happy to have you chime in anytime. It's not my meeting or anyone else's meeting. It's just to try to let the community know that we're paying attention to what's going on. Okay, so Anna, give me 1 second. Keith, let's move on to our next speaker. I just see that.
So it's Alicia, and then followed by Laura, and then after Laura, it's Elizabeth Adams.
Hi there, it's Alicia Cardillo. I am a Springdale Park parent and recently been rezoned to Inman. And I am one of those parents that has a third grader with a rising kinder. And so just on the topic of grandfathering, I've not, if you were to poll me at this point, I don't have a clue how I would answer the question of what am I going to do with my kinder, because there's just still so many unknowns. Even if we know Inman was right now, like, there's just so many unknowns that I could still go either way, just as a point of feedback. Michelle, thank you for your recent engagement on Spark Bees. I really appreciate you amplifying that and enabling us to keep our bees. And then I do have 2 follow-up questions. One's to Waukesha Howe's question actually about the principal. Everything you just described is for a school that has an existing principal. So for the Inman K-5, there isn't I'm assuming if K-5 goes through, there isn't a go team to present the principal candidates to. So who would be at the table helping to guide the administration as to who we want there? And then my second follow-up question is actually, I forgot the name, the person who just spoke. What were these meetings where the minutes are already posted? And I missed the title of these meetings. I would love to go visit those minutes.
Okay, so great. That the principal selection process for new K-5, I got you on that. So I'm going to tell you what happened historically. I mean, obviously we're with a new administration, and go teams were not established the last time we went through this. But when Spark was being formed, the reason they're a PTO, number one, just to give you a little bit of background, the reason they're a PTO is because it was not an established school, and Georgia PTA would not grant them a PTA license or whatever, charter or whatever. So they went with the PTO to be an independent organization so that the community could help begin to support the school to get it off the ground. In the principal selection process, there were folks from both Morningside and Mary Lynn, because that Ponce Highland piece was part of Mary Lynn that got redrawn into Spark. And then all of Virginia Highland obviously got drawn back into what is now Springdale Park. But just to be clear, the folks that were on that principal selection committee were not just Virginia Highland and Ponce Highland parents. They were parents from the school community, so that the communities were represented in what was going to be a new school. Does that make sense? Like you had.
It does.
Okay, so that I'm not saying that that's what they're going to do now, but I put it down in my notes to make sure that I bring it up with the superintendent to see how they're going to put in place that process. Because I think, to your point, it's very valid to make sure that we have community at the table, or us at the table, or if they're going to form a go team beforehand, or whatever they want to do, that we do it before you have to go through that principal selection process.
Thank you.
Yep.
And then what were these meetings where the minutes are posted?
Okay, so I stuck Assembly on the site, and I will go back, or Keith, can you help me out here and post at least one of your student advisory committees off Assembly's links?
Yep, I will.
Okay.
I'll put it in the
I think
chat.
that's really, I was just looking for the phrasing, Student Advisory Committee
Okay,
and-
could do
and-
that.
Student Advisory Council.
Council.
Yep, Student
Yeah.
Advisory
Okay.
Council.
Thank you very much.
Okay, and so we're off to, is it Laura now, Keith?
Yes, Laura, then Elizabeth.
Okay, great.
Hey, hey, Michelle and Tamara, thank you guys for being here this morning. Appreciate it. I guess my question that I have for you is sort of logistically, obviously the K-5, new K-5 proposal is the one that's going forward. And I guess my concern, I'm like Kristen, I am I guess Eastern Virginia Highlands, a family that's going to remain at Spark once, if they open the new K-5. So my concern is just the numbers, the kind of imbalance in the numbers in the different elementary schools, and I guess the capacity numbers. So like Spark is being taken down to like 60% or 65% capacity. I don't have the presentation in front of me. And Mary Lynn is being brought down to about that same capacity too, whereas Morningside is going to stay at like 80-85%. And then I can't remember what the capacity estimates are for the new elementary school. But I just don't know, is there any opportunity before the vote on this to give some thought on balancing those out more, so that, maybe we can make all of them roughly 70% capacity, and, just so that there's a little bit more of a balance among the schools.
So that's a great question. I think it is, and I say this with all grace, it is so upsetting to see Virginia Highland be split in half as a neighborhood. However, the properties that we have available to us reside in a neighborhood that has a tremendous population of children. And unfortunately, and I've said this before, and it didn't seem to have much, nobody seemed to really care, but your city council line is going to change north-south. So you're going to kind of be quartered. Do you know what I mean? I mean, like it's just very unfortunate, but it's just the way that the growth is happening currently with respect to the population. I hear you with respect to Morningside. I've gotten a lot of feedback about, what political pull does Morningside have? Yes, I do reside in Morningside. That does not mean that I am politically pulling for them to stay together. The issue is, and honestly, you can Google map it. If you look at Springdale Park, Inman, and Morningside, there's so many parts of those areas that are quote unquote relatively close to the school. I'm not even talking about walkability. I mean, my children, my younger two, my special needs could not, but my younger two walked to Inman every day for middle school and walked home. Even if it was like lightly raining, they wanted to walk to school. And my middle one sometimes wants to walk to Grady and sometimes, or Midtown, and sometimes wants to walk home from Midtown. It's about 1.5 miles from the house, and he's older and whatnot. I think the challenge is, there's a bunch of different challenges here. One is, based on the NPU system and the way that the city has functioned, neighborhoods have always tried to stay together. And and while I understand that Virginia Highland is being divided in half, or a third to 2/3, if that's the way we want to look at it, but is being divided nonetheless, and that there's a small part of Morningside that just doesn't have a lot of children right now, but still a small part of Morningside that's being broken down to move to Inman. And then all of Inman Park, who's already been on the bus, but can still stay together as a neighborhood and still be bused to a new school, can stay together. I think, like, I guess using a local demographer, I think we're still trying to use that historic view of let's try to keep our neighborhoods together as much as we can. And then again, I think if you looked at the proximity of Springdale Park, Inman, and Morningside, you see that they're all so close to each other. You really, however you're going to draw the lines is just very dependent on where the population is. And I do believe within a very few years, more of Morningside is going to have to decide if it's going to go to either Springdale Park or Inman, given the growth. If that makes sense.
Yeah, it does. I think it would make more sense since we're disrupting these kids now.
I hear you. And I've said this, and I'm not a demographer, but I literally live in between Courtney and Morningside on North Highland. And when this idea came from Piedmont Heights of, why aren't you taking families from Morningside because they're closer to Inman? I literally said, because I've been living there for 25 plus years, I literally said, there are not enough kids. We'd have to draw the line past Morningside, like the road. I said, we might even have to go all the way up to Cumberland. Cumberland backs up on the back end of Morningside Elementary School. Do you see what I'm saying? Like, that's where the numbers are. So that, unfortunately, right now, it's a numbers issue. Does that mean that the numbers aren't going to change? Oh, they are, because across the street, I have toddlers, and 3 doors down, I have toddlers. But, there's not the numbers right where I particularly live in Morningside to push that there. And we are still closer to Morningside physically. We're within the walk zone. And it is closer for us with a mile walk. So for elementary school, it's a mile walk. That's the radius. Is, if you live within a mile of the school, you're in the walk zone. And then in middle school and high school, it's 1.5 miles. They give you a little bit more space. So I guess my point being is, I hear what you're saying. I'm happy to give that feedback to the administration. However, I do feel as though they've done the best that they can, kind of given the proximity of the schools and where the population is with respect to the students, knowing good and well that that's going to continuously change over the next 10 years.
Yeah, thanks, Michelle, because that is a very good point, because the geographic distribution of school-age children deciding to go to public school is not going to be static from one year to the next. It's just, you can't control what people do. It's human behavior, how they move. And it's not just pure numbers, as Michelle brought up. We've got a lot of goals that are sometimes in conflict. So the goal of the stated goal for the administration of distributing the population among the schools more evenly rubs up against a goal of trying to keep neighborhoods together. So yes, you could, it's just a function of the numbers of seats and the numbers of children. So you could distribute it more equally, but you're going to have more to try to get everybody, well, first of all, to get to 70%, you'd have to have more kids in the neighborhood, which will eventually happen because we know we're growing. But to distribute it more equally would mean that you're going to have to, try to, carve up neighborhoods even more.
Yeah, and I guess my question is more of a fairness question. Like, obviously, Virginia Highlands is getting carved up like crazy, and Virginia Highlands is bearing the brunt and the sweat equity of building up this new school. I don't know, maybe it's just my perspective. To me, it's like, okay, well, we're carving up already. I think overall, as a fairness perspective, it makes more sense to let's distribute some kids from all the cluster elementary schools to this new one. Let's share that burden more fairly, and let's distribute students among schools more fairly. We're all going to be together at Howard and Midtown. So, I don't know. To me, it just seems like I understand what you're saying about we've already carved up one neighborhood, let's try and at least keep a few intact, but from my perspective, we just feel Spark parents and I think the parents zoned to the new elementary school feel like we are bearing a huge burden that some families from other parts of the cluster are not having to bear. And it would be more fair to put the investment in that new, there's lots of families from Virginia Highlands and Morningside that are in easy walking distance of the new school. I don't know. I feel like I see what you're saying about neighborhoods, but I think what I'm saying is from a fairness perspective and from just a distributing kids among schools evenly perspective, the way they've distributed everything doesn't make sense. And it also looks like Morningside's going to be at capacity again in another 5 years, which really makes no sense to me at all if the whole purpose of rushing this is to deal with Morningside's new building. So
yeah, and I think that Laura, the point that you bring up with respect to Morningside, and again, that's where I reside. It needs to be a very deep community conversation with respect to the neighborhoods that feed into Morningside, because if you literally live in Morningside, right, like the decision has to be made if the line's going to be drawn to Morningside or to Cumberland, or are we going to ask other neighborhoods to go to a different school like we're asking Ansley and Sherwood to do? And so there needs to be, there has to be a deeper Morningside Elementary School conversation, not in the immediate future, but in the future as we continue through our planning as a cluster about how we're going to address our capacity issues. Because it becomes a question of, do the neighborhoods north of the closest school have priority, or does people who literally live closest to the school have priority, right? Because that's kind of where we are.
Well, and so Michelle, I think what you're bringing up is I would like to see, return back to the long range planning committee that the cluster has,
Yes.
so that you can establish all of these things and say, we do have all of these goals. We know that some of them are going to be in conflict. We know that the population is going to change. And here is how we are going to proactively prepare to deal with it when the time comes, when you hit triggers, so that you come up with it together. And that's what I think bothers me the most about how this is played out, is that that group got silenced. So this cluster coming together to have these discussions, knowing that it's all going to be difficult, and that we're, there's going to be give and take, and what is the most fair, so to speak, and that we're having a holistic conversation, because I go back to what I brought up at one of the board meetings recently, which is, well, the fairest one would have been the 4-5, but people did not like that. There was a lot of people who didn't like it. So, but I just don't think we've been having the kind of robust, joint problem solving that Michelle's getting at. The kind of thing where you work together as a cluster, get your parameters, continue the conversation, always know that you're going to have to problem solve in advance. And so I appreciate Michelle for promoting that.
Yeah, and just to be clear, I'm so disappointed that we're divided again as a community. This was the last thing I ever wanted to happen, and this was part of the reason I even got inspired to run for the board, was to try to help our community have a voice at the table, and actually, help other communities have a voice at the table, because there's so many communities that families are just doing whatever it takes to get their kids to school, let alone take the time out to, like we do, spend all night learning about split campuses or dual campuses or new elementary schools. Do you know what I'm saying?
Yeah, absolutely.
And it's really important that we help the administration get this right, so that we can get it right across the district.
Yeah.
Laura, are you good? Anything else?
No, I think I'm good. I guess just my point would be that, if there's any way to, we feel like we're in this huge crunch to get this done, but if there is a
Better
stopgap
distribution.
that could happen to bring us back into the planning process, and let's do it right, then that would be my vote. But I'll be
Great.
quiet now because there's plenty of other people who need to talk, but
Yeah,
thank
no
you, I
worries.
appreciate
Yeah,
it.
no worries. All right, so I believe we have Elizabeth next. Keith, is that correct?
That is correct.
Perfect.
Okay. So yeah, I definitely echo the points that were just made, that there were seem to be assumptions that the north-south growth is going to be exponential, and that the Midtown cluster or the Midtown area may grow so exponentially because of multi-unit housing and the growth that's going on there, that's where the focus is on, kind of like long-term growth projections over short-term impacts, not that we know if those multi-unit houses will result in increased families necessarily, or increased families that want to go to APS. But in thinking about the short-term impacts, I actually, and I voiced this via email, but I just am like a big proponent of the multi-year grandfathering. For transparency, I live in Virginia Highland. I live right behind John Howell Park. My kids would be zoned to Inman Elementary. I have a rising twin kindergartners and a rising third grader. So my older son, who's, he's been really resilient through this whole process and he's fared well. I think he could potentially go to a new Inman if that goes forward. But I think it doesn't honor the amount of like social and emotional and even physical barriers that the children have faced during the pandemic. So I just really think, even if it weren't for my son, like my kindergartners would go to Inman, I would send them to Inman, and I would consider sending my older son to Inman as well. But just seeing the impact that the pandemic has had on these children, I really think having the option to grandfather in is very reasonable. And it disappointed me to see that was like kind of the one point of concession that the administration put forward, that they would be willing to like revisit multi-year grandfathering out of this whole proposal. That seems like it's the lowest hanging fruit, right? It's the easiest thing to take away. And I don't think that it really honors the work that our kids have, and the amount of transitions that our kids have gone through. So I'm a proponent of the multi-year grandfathering. I would like to hear more from the administration about the process, specifically, like, what does that mean if they take away multi-year grandfathering? Does that mean that we would all have to apply for administrative transfers? Like, what's the timeline for that for kids that are like going into 4th and 5th grade,
Yep, I got you. So let me just be really clear. Our current policy is grandfathering for the top level. So it's the 5th grade, the 8th grade, and then your junior year, just to allow you to grandfather into a school. What we have suggested, and I was definitely one of those advocates on the board who asked for this, was allowing it to have a sibling tethering to it. So this is something new that we're doing. It's not something that we're bringing back or that we've done in the past. This is something new that we're asking the administration to be sensitive to the experiences that families have had, and trying to figure out how to manage a new facility. And again, that would have gone with any proposal that was on the table. We wanted to make sure that we were offering an opportunity for families to do what was in their best interest. Does that make sense?
It does, but so my question is less about the tethering between siblings, right? I mean, for me personally, I think my twins who are younger, they'll fare fine wherever they are, and we would be willing to split the kids and go to separate schools. I'm specifically asking about the multi-year grandfathering, which has not historically been done. That was what was my understanding of what was on the table, is that,
3 through 5.
current K through 3, yeah, exactly, would be
Yeah.
able to stay at the school. There have been
Yeah.
arguments against that, that might take the wind out of the sails of a new elementary school, because so many upperclassmen would choose to grandfather into their, old school. So I get the arguments for and against. My thing is really just about being, the administration being transparent about the numbers. So
Yeah.
I think that, and it doesn't seem like it's that difficult for them to potentially put out numbers on the capacity of each grade level, assuming that the upperclassmen choose to grandfather into their school, right? What would
Right.
that mean? What would that look like? And then also to get information back about the process. If you decide not to move forward with multi-year grandfathering, what does that process look like in terms of applying for administrative transfer within the cluster? If that's something that, if I wanted my older son to go to Spark and multi-year grandfathering weren't an option, right? Then would I need to apply for
administrative
transfer?
transfer. Okay, I got you. Okay,
Thank
I'm
you.
sorry. I thank you for walking me through that twice. I guess I need some
Loaded
coffee
question.
or a Coca-Cola or something, but I got you. Okay, I put it in my notes and
Thank you.
I'll see if we can get some better clarification on that. I don't want to keep Keith all day. And Waukesha, would you mind if we let Melissa and Lakita speak, since they haven't had a chance to speak? And I
Sure.
can follow up with you offline, or we can see if we have a little bit more
Yeah, that's
time.
fine.
Okay, thank you.
That's fine.
All right, Melissa.
Okay. Hi, Michelle and Tamara. What I wanted to ask you guys today, just as board members and on behalf of the children who will be actually going to the new Inman school, is how can you guys, as advocates for the children, sort of insist that APS commits to certain things to ensure a smooth and successful transition for them? Because we keep hearing from APS that this is a better long-term plan, but they acknowledge that there will be a lot of short-term turmoil. And during a time of learning loss and this student anxiety we see, and then maybe with a lot of their classmates staying at their old schools, I think, none of us want to just sacrifice this group of kids to the process. And we just haven't heard any sort of thoughts or commitments about how to keep that from happening. So I have sort of like specific questions just to make a general point, like, will anybody be making sure that the new school has library books on day one? That's a thing that didn't happen at Spark. Will there be any sort of extra funding for curriculum that's comparable to that they would have had at Spark or Morningside for the first 3 or so years, to have some sort of smooth transition and put the kids all on the same footing when they get to Howard? Will the Inman building be getting a security vestibule before day one? We've asked that, but haven't been able to get an answer from APS. I have lots of those kinds of questions, but I just sort of wanted to lift up that vein of thought to you guys as advocates for those kids that will be at the school, and sort of ask you to hold APS's feet to the fire there a little bit and get some actual concrete commitments about how we're going to support those kids.
Those are great points. I made sure I noted them all down. The security vestibule at Inman has been a long, there's been many of us who've been asking for that for many, many years. And I'm glad that you brought that back up. The administration has said that it is looking at providing additional financial supports to get a new school up and running. I don't think we've gotten a real strong breakdown of what that is. Also, I'm sure you're obviously aware that, again, the PTO was started by the surrounding elementary schools before Springdale Park was open to help transition some of the things that our PTAs and PTOs support in our communities that other communities across APS do not have. I'm not saying it's going to be perfect. And I appreciate getting the feedback so that I can share it with the administration. And we'll definitely bring these points up. But anytime y'all think that if you can, in your discussions, assuming that this moves forward, because again, it's a 9-member vote. I don't know many of my colleagues who would be opposed to having a new elementary school. I'll just be honest with you. So you may want to reach out to them and have a conversation with them about what your pros and cons are with respect to the last 2 proposals and how the administration is moving forward. But as you come together to work and figure out what it is that we need to make the school successful, you just share with the administration, you share with the board, you share with me where you feel you have a gap, and then we will work to fill the gap. I mean, that's the best I can say. I hear a lot of people say a lot of interesting things about when Springdale Park got started. I just want to be really clear. I mean, my eldest was in 2nd grade at the time. My middle one was impacted the most because all his friends from preschool went to Spark and he was going to Morningside. And then my daughter had a very different kind of experience. Her best friend was at Spark while she was at Morningside, but she already had some Morningside friends too. At the end of the day, we're one great community. I mean, the Midtown community is phenomenal. And as long as we understand how to support each other, I believe our schools have been quite good. And I do not believe, and I appreciate people giving me the feedback, that Springdale Park was not a good school when it opened. I don't believe that. All the families that I know that went there, the parents that were leading Springdale Park and would continue to reach out to Morningside to say, hey, how are we doing this? How do we do that? I feel like we gave a tremendous amount of support and actually became really good friends with women that lived in Virginia Highlands that I sort of knew, but didn't know quite as well as I do today. And that was all from working together as a community to support what was happening in our schools. And what is going to happen if we move forward with the new K-5 also impacts Morningside, also impacts Springdale Park, also impacts Mary Lynn. And as long as we can work together to say, hey, here's what we're having trouble with. Can you tell me what your solutions have been, and have an open dialogue about it? I do believe we will be successful. However, to your point, I have written down where you believe the administration can support us. And I will make sure that I stay on top of that, especially the library books. I like that point a lot.
And that is bigger than the Midtown community. It is something that, you know, this process has highlighted, that when we do have a situation where we need to open a new school or merge two schools or anything, that we need to, you know, consider putting some policy, putting some actual board funding, you know, around transition, you know, so that we can ensure that all schools, you know, when they have to encounter a change, are supported and can be successful from day one. So, you know, this is not unique to the Midtown cluster. And I also wanted to echo what Michelle was saying. You know, both of our valedictorian and salutatorian at Midtown High School were part of the first kindergarten class at Spark. So, you know, I just think that's something for Spark to be pretty proud of.
Absolutely. And I didn't want to, I was not insinuating that Spark was not a good school. I think that it was, and we were there pretty early with my oldest. My point was there's that 3 to 5 year period that's a lot of growing pains. And I was just talking about support during that period, the best way to make that happen and not lose those kids.
Absolutely. And so what I'm hoping is that we can come together and decide what kind of, you know, support that is, what it looks like. And I'm really interested in hearing from Ms. Blue, because I want to find out how we involve teachers, you know, because I think that's one thing that we haven't heard much from. And that was an unfortunate thing of moving away from the long range planning committee, because it did have teachers on it. And so, you know, I want us to be mindful that, you know, the teachers, so staff, and the neighborhood. And I'm glad to see neighborhood representatives here too. And, you know, we're going to need the support of, you know, all of that to figure out what it takes and what kind of supports that we can apply as a district to make sure whatever we choose is successful from day one.
Thank you.
All right, so I think we've got Ms. Blue.
Yep, she will be our last one, and then board member Olympiadis, we will allow you And if Board Member Jones want to bring any closing remarks before we close out. So after Ms. Blue, then we will turn it over to you to bring closing remarks.
Okay, great.
Good morning, guys. Hopefully everybody's having a great morning. I am Miss Blue. I have been teaching in this cluster for about 12 years. I was thinking about getting on here and saying something at first, and I was like, no, I won't. But I actually wanted to, because there was a young lady that spoke earlier about the community service piece and getting the students to participate in the community service piece. And so I was thinking about that because, and I've spoken with 2 other board members. Our mission statement, vision statement says that we are prepping the kids for college and career, but we have actually a policy in place. And I was wondering, like, what are the requirements to maybe get it tweaked a little bit or to kind of revamp it? Because I think the students, they're not pushing themselves, and it's because of this policy. So the policy that I'm referring to, I left the document at home. I'm actually at the store in the parking lot, states that the students are allowed to redo assignments. And so what I am finding from going from middle school to high school is that once the kids figure that out, then they don't put forth a good effort that will prepare them for college or career. So my question is there any way, or what is the process for maybe revamping that? Because once students know that they can, then they seem to almost put everything on the back burner.
Ms. Blue, that's a great question. And I'm so excited because Tamara actually serves on policy. And so it's a great point for her to take back to her committee. I don't mean to stick her on point on this. However, we all have our fortes, and policy is not, don't get me wrong, I'm all about us having rules and regulations, but policy is definitely not my forte. I hear you on that. And I think a lot of that, and we can do a little bit of research on that and get back to everyone, but I think a little bit of that goes back to what the state provides us with respect to how to engage kids, because I know we were just at GSBA, which is the Georgia School Board Association conference last week, and this is something that's in debate across the state. Is it boils down to, there's even debate around how many diplomas we should have. So as you know, we have special ed diplomas and regular ed diplomas. There's conversation within the state to have a college diploma, a CTE diploma, and then continue to have a special ed diploma. So there's a lot of conversation around this to try to your point, I hear you, to help children become more responsible with their future and how to take responsibility for their actions. I got you there. But there's also this, the second part of that is, how do we help all students succeed who may not ever have the opportunity to be successful in a calculus class or a geometry class? Well, maybe they need geometry. Let me back up because that's carpentry. But but do you know what I mean? I mean, like, they just may not ever be able to take calculus or trigonometry, but need to make sure that they're proficient in certain areas to be successful in life. With all that said, Tamara, I'll let you chime in, but I do think a lot of this is coming from the state for allowing children the opportunity to have a second chance with respect to their schoolwork.
Yeah. And so before you start, Tamara, let me just give an example. So at in January, for instance, the kids are not really motivated. I have to do a lot to get them motivated, right? But by the time May comes, they know, like, this is the end. They can't turn anything. And it's like a light switch has come on. They are working hard. They're asking questions. They're participating. And it's because they know at this point, that's it. It's no turning back. So I get we're trying to reach every student. So maybe being able to redo certain assignments, not all, because when you're able to do all assignments, that doesn't prep them for real life. You can't redo a light bill. Like, you do have to pay a light bill on time. And if you don't, there are consequences. I think the kids are not really understanding the consequence. And some of them sometimes don't care. They're like, oh, I can get an 80. That's good enough for me. So just like you said, putting it back on them so they can understand this applies in the real world.
And I don't have all the answers to that. So what we're figuring out, like what Michelle was saying, is there's some directions that are coming from law, and there's some that are coming from board policy. And I would have to look and see if there's any particular policy that I don't think there's one from the board perspective. But then you also have administrative regulations. So things coming from central office that are administrative regulations or practices, and then there's things at the individual school level. So what I'm going to have to do is go tease out where some of this is coming from, because I don't know how much, going back to what Elizabeth was talking about, the principal autonomy, I don't know how much at this point it is given to the individual school to be able to say, this is how we're going to do grades or not do grades, but I will look into that and try to get you an answer.
Thank you. And can you make it where, like, literally, I'm being honest right now, being transparent. We had to take work up until the last day of school. That was very difficult to try to grade it and post grades at the same time. So just some type of like deadline or something to where it allows me to like grade and then put grades in, because you got to imagine if I'm taking work from January and I'm trying to get it in and they can turn it in on May 25th, that's a lot.
Yeah.
Right. That is a lot. It's a lot.
All right. I've got my notes.
All right, Miss Blue, thank you so much.
Thank you,
Glad
guys.
you could join us. Yes,
thank
Tamara,
you.
I'll let you offer some closing remarks and then I'll close us out.
Thank you for having these forums. I've been trying to hop onto as many of the district forums as I can. Being an at-large member, I don't actually have a district. So it really is helpful to be able to hear what's going on everywhere. And looking forward to because different districts do things different ways. So I appreciate this forum to just be able to, see and hear from people in the community. So I take copious notes, and yes, I understand all of, a lot of really good points got brought up today. And I'm just trying to focus on, getting everybody's voice heard, working on the engagement piece and making sure that we are doing things in a way that is fair to everyone in the city. That's why I bring up the thing about if we're going to be doing transitional supports, that needs to be applied to everything all across the district.
Great, thanks, Tamara, and I'm glad you were able to join us. I see so many people. I'm so excited. It's a really great turnout for middle of the summer Zoom. I see lots of folks who I haven't had a chance to talk to in a while. So anyways, I'm throwing in my cell phone number. As always, y'all, please feel free to text or call anytime. I appreciate everyone's feedback, and I will definitely follow up with the superintendent. I think she hears more things from me than she does most, but I don't know, that might not be true. My colleagues may have just as much information to share, but I always appreciate y'all giving me your feedback. I appreciate y'all understanding that as stressful as it is for you, it is equally as stressful for me to represent the community. This has nothing to do with what does Michelle think or what does Michelle not think. This is about me representing you and making sure that I'm listening to your voices and advocating for what we believe as a community is in our best interest. So I really appreciate y'all. And like I said, please feel free to reach out anytime. I do my best to get back with you. I will say that I think we finally got my Let's Talk under control, but my email is still, the board office is helping me with that because, and I appreciate everyone's feedback. It's just too much. It's a little overwhelming for me to manage. And so they are trying to help me manage all the emails that I've received. If you don't hear from me, or if your friend says, I never heard from her, please just share my cell phone number and just text her. She'll reach out to you and she's always happy to talk. So thank you all for coming. Like I said, we'll see you again in July. The Inman issue does go to the full board on August the 8th. We start school August the 1st. So we decided that that was a big enough day without having to have a board meeting. So we pushed the board meeting to the second Monday of the month. And like I said, that gives us a good runway, 6 weeks or whatnot, to get your feedback on whatever it is that you'd like to give, and know for sure that it will be given to the administration. So thank y'all. And Waukesha, let me know if you want to talk afterwards. I'm happy to, you just give me a call.
Yeah, I'm gonna call you now.
Okay. All right. Y'all have a great weekend. And I hope y'all have a great 4th of July. I hope y'all are able to take a little bit of a time out before we get back into the Inman issue or the District 3 issues or the APS issues. But like I said, I'm always here for you. So have a great day and a great weekend. Take care.
Have a great weekend, everyone.
Thank you.
You
Keith.
too. Bye-bye.
All right, bye-bye.